Oliver Stone, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Primo.
Yeah, thank you very much for being back on. I sincerely do appreciate it. So you have come out with a new book called Chasing the Light, and I just wanted to start off by asking you, what made you want to write this book and release it now?
It's been in the works for two and a half years about. I was a writer when I started. I wrote a book when I was 19 about confessional, very, very intimate. I'd gone to Vietnam as a teacher and as a merchant sailor, and I'd come back to the United States. I dropped out of college at Yale, and I wrote this very, very radical, pretentious book. And eventually, it was rejected, which broke my heart. But it was published eventually in 1997 as A Child's Night Dream, which is an interesting early. It's really from the point of view of a 19-year-old young man who's trying to find his character, trying to find who he is. It's a quest, No, you don't know who you are at 19. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what the purpose of your life is. All these questions come into play. I was certainly confused because I grew up I had lived a very good life, a very sheltered life until about the age of 15, 16, when my parents were tempestuously divorced, and it was quite a revelation. Things came out that I never knew. It's like leading double lives. You don't know your parents really until you start to hear the shit. So it was kind of the end of a family. It broke up, and we went different directions in the world. I went out to Asia, where I basically tried to find myself, and that was what that book was about. So the writing impulse was in me, and I suppose I have a confessional impulse in me to get it out, and that's always been there. Making movies, I've never done a movie about my own life, and I didn't. And frankly, I don't know if I had the guts to do it. I admire Fellini for doing it, and people like that, and Truffaut, and so many filmmakers have dealt with it. But I have had a problem with that, probably because, well, movies are very commercial, and they have to, It's not like it's hard to do what the Europeans do in American movies. Some people have tried. So let's say it was buried, but it was in there. I mean, part of me is in all those movies, but it was always the real me is still there. And I wanted to, as I aged and became less involved in movies, I wanted to come to terms with myself now and say, this is the bookend, 1973, 74.
Right.
Okay, this is the bookend. And I wanted to be honest above all, and that's what I tried to be. The question is why did I end it in 1986? That's because it's a big story, it's a thick story, and it ties to its beginnings with the divorce. I opened the book like a novel in 1976. I'm 30 years old, broke, depressed, and I ended in 1986 when I'm at the top of the world.
It's a good arc, good character development arc.
It is, but in between that, I go back to 1940s, 50s, 60s, all of which are important, and I show you the arc of a life. So in a sense, because I had a dream of making this, of achieving this, something like this, I achieved it at 40. I really did. It's a cost of realizing that dream that I was trying to put in paper.
What was that cost, if you could summarize it?
Well, it's in the book. It was a lot of rejection, a lot of failure. Devotion, resiliency is required. And I think I've been asked, on my travels around the world, what's it like to start, how you do it. Young people have always been curious how you write, how you come on subject matter, how do you realize a movie? These questions always come up, so it's nice to be able to luxuriate, for me to go back and slow down and think about all these things that happened and learn the lessons from them if they can. It goes so fast when you're doing it, one movie after the other. I worked pretty fast in those days that I just needed to actually appreciate what happened. And I think because I kept some diaries, thank God, I had access to some memory. I wasn't consistent in the
I was going to ask, was it a consistent diary, or is this sort of off and on over the years?
Not in the 70s. No, it was inconsistent because there was other issues going on. But at least there was enough there to start to pick the bones of it. In the 80s, it becomes very consistent. In the 80s, it's almost too much. 90s, I kept a diary from the 80s on, so I have much more material, and so much happened. Oh, God, I'm looking forward one day really to reading the diaries because I haven't read them. And it's unbelievable what you find out when you actually look at what you wrote.
Right. It brings you back into that time, too, and that mindset, I'd imagine.
Which is very important, and that's what I wanted to do in the book. If you look at the 10 chapters, I really go into the mindset of the person at that time. So when it goes to 1982 or 3, you really, for me, I'm living in 82, 83. I think that's a wonderful experience to have, to re-experience your life and appreciate it.
Tell me this, how did you develop and build off of the themes from your 1998 book, Child's Night Dream?
Child's Night Dream, you have to decide. The theme of the book is kind of crazy. It's a young man. I mean, he's wrestling with life. He's trying to understand it. And he has a death wish, too. I would say that it's, it's so different now when you're writing much later in your life. I've established a pattern for myself. I didn't have a pattern there. You're asked a very tough question, who is that person? You'd have to read the book and tell me what you think. Honestly, it's an interesting book, but obviously he's this desperate, lost, romantic soul. And I think I realized that dream. I realized a lot of things I wanted to realize in my life. I became what I wanted to be. You'll see projections into the future in that book. And I became that, to a degree, that person. So the theme of this one, the Chasing the Light, is realizing this dream that you have when you're in your 20s, or whenever sooner. You want to get somewhere. You want to do something, and this is how hard it was sometimes to get it done, and what it took. And it's
Which book?
Power of family too. Don't forget, there's a lot of there's not only a mom and dad, but there's also a grandmother, a French grandmother, plays a very important role. And it's also about Vietnam War. It's about America, about my growing realization, coming from a conservative background, my father, and learning about life, real life, outside the cerebral side, learning about, as I said, the 6 inches in front of my face,
Which book was harder to write?
You're talking about me at 19 and now? No, this 19 was painful. It was just emotional. It was all emotion. 66, 67, that was when it was written. And when I was 19 years old, you see, it was on the spot. And I kept it in that form. I kept it as a young man. So there's embarrassing stuff in there and very pretentious stuff. And I tried,
what was pretentious?
I tried, by the way, to keep an honesty here too. I didn't, there is stuff that nobody wants to reveal about themselves, but I did try to be as honest as I could to the spirit of this new time that I went through.
Well, in revisiting, all of these different periods of your life, what was the most hard to kind of go back and look through?
I suppose, first of all, you don't have time when I was moving on that Midnight Express train. You don't have time to look. You're moving to this thing. You're trying to make it, as a person. You're trying to make money. You're trying to make family. You're trying to have a relationship. There's all kinds of things that are pressing down on you. You barely have time to keep a diary. But certainly the period after I won my first Oscar with Midnight Express was very difficult because of because of the pressures of success, what that's like to be on top of the Hollywood world, and to have that, to make a second film that was not successful. The Hand was difficult for me, and there was a downfall, and also I had problems with cocaine at some point. And I got hooked, which was hurting my writing. That was painful. And there's things like divorce from my first wife. my first wife was in the book in 1975, and those years of rejection in New York, all those scripts I wrote. I didn't detail all the scripts, but when you write something like this, you go through your memory of all the scripts you wrote and how much they meant to you, each one. They were like, yeah, and they were lost to time. My time with Robert Bolton and the cover up and so forth. I also talk about Vietnam quite a bit, and I talk about. But you see, when I was in Vietnam, I was young. I was 22 when I went to Vietnam. 21, 22. I was a little bit older, and I felt like I was too young to understand all this shit that was going on. I mean, I talk about, I don't know if you read, there's a human wave attack, an all-night battle, where it's the strangest battle I've been in, and I don't.
1968, right?
Yeah, January 1. I don't see one single enemy that night. I don't fire at all, and yet all these people are dead around me. It's like a dream. In other words, I think because you're young, you're kind of insulated from it. You don't see it the same way I would see it now. And that's an interesting thing when you rewrite your Vietnam experience. Now I see the weight of it, and I don't. And I talk about Vietnam, and I talk about what I think are honest failures of the American military. They're real honest, big lies, and what it did to us. We were really lost in that jungle.
Do you find that the public's appetite has changed over the years where I think, in the 80s and 90s, maybe people were ready to start exploring some of the failures of Vietnam and, thinking about, U.S. imperialism and questioning it. Do you think that that's changed now? Do you think that people are less willing to look back and question those things?
Yes and no. I think there was a surge, certainly in the 80s and the 90s, there was a reevaluation. Certainly. There was even talk, if you remember, of a peace dividend under the under the Bush father administration. Peace dividend, that never happened. They always have to invent a new reason to spend money on the military. Never happened, and that was a big disappointment. And of course, we went back into a series of wars again, so we didn't, there wasn't, if we learned something, we certainly didn't express it in our actions. We did the same damn thing over and over again. Well,
I will say, though, I think that there was, the public was against the Iraq War. I mean, I was in Washington, D.C., where there was hundreds of thousands of people there in 2005 marching against the war. But I don't know how much that was just the fact that it was a Republican, and if a Democrat had done the same thing, maybe there wouldn't have been those protests.
That was sad because so many people, not only in America, in Australia, everywhere in the world, there was huge crowds. But that was the expression of a popular will, and yet it was ignored, blank out ignored by Bush and his administration. That really was like Reagan firing the air controllers. It was you realize at that point that we had no say, we had no democracy. There was no instinct to listen to the people. And they knew, everyone knew that it was a fraud in a way, except the dedicated crazies who started the war. And that was very disappointing. The Patriot Act that came off 9/11 was a disaster for this country. Surveillance came into a new country, a new layer of bureaucracy, a new layer of 1984 came in, and Orwell and all that. And it's haunted us ever since. I mean, even the movie. The movies changed. They became more patriotic, and they were all about spies. The CIA was suddenly a hero on television and in movies. It was really, the Pentagon got more involved, as did the CIA, in Hollywood projects. And films like the ones I used to make became less in vogue, although I continue to make them. I did do Snowden in spite of the odds there, and Snowden was about that surveillance, as was W was about the love of war, appetite for war, the madness of it. And, those two films stand out but it's not the climate for it, obviously. There was not that. So, you have to, I did documentaries instead. I started to really work the documentary field. I did.
Right. Very well, I might add.
Thank you. And I did a history of the United States. I did the Untold History of the United States, which took a lot of work. Took 5 years to get made. That one is a historian and I from American University we put together a 12-hour documentary with a book, which I really, a lot of people like. It does very well. It's on Netflix and continues to sell.
I enjoyed it very much. Well, just on the subject of W, I do have to ask you because, at the time I thought that you did a good job in humanizing him to explore him. But when we look now in the media where George W. Bush is hanging out with Ellen DeGeneres and all these neocons are being rehabilitated, when you look back at that film, do you think that it does a good enough job casting George W. Bush as the villain that he is?
Well, the problem is that George W. Bush is a human being. And, he could stumble and do the worst things imaginable. And you can't hate him because he's kind of dumb. He's like a teddy bear. I mean, you can hate what he did. You can hate the people around him. I mean, Cheney is the villainous, cold character in the movie, played by Richard Dreyfuss. Mm-hmm. And also this Rumsfeld is a monster. I mean, I wish I'd made him worse, but there is a lot of criticism implicit in that film. It's a crazy way to run government, and you see Bush Clinton said to me, he saw the movie, he said, "You got it." He said, "That was right on." It's very funny. He said that to me, and wow. So did not through other people. Nancy Reagan, of all people, saw the movie.
Really?
Yeah, she thought it was right on. I mean, that's the way they saw this spoiled, stupid man who became president. It was pathetic for this country, as was the 2000 election, by the way. I have to say that was a total miscarriage of justice. It was, and the way they did it, the way they got away with it, and that's where the anger should reside. In 2001, that way that we let ourselves be deluded by
propagandized.
Well, it was well done. I mean, the Republicans had that pretty much that revolt in Miami, the timing of it, and just everything was manipulated. The country, and then even Scalia on the Supreme Court when he threw the election. I mean, and then they made a hero of him when he died, as they made a hero of McCain. I mean, we've lived through reversals of history here, pretty extreme in our lifetime. Mm-hmm. I don't know where America is or going, and it's just, it seems that I don't want to get too, I don't want to be pessimistic, but it's not a good path we're on. And,
I think almost everyone would agree with that at this point. Well, I do have to ask you, since you mentioned maybe you would make that slight change to W. When you look back at all of your films, is there any film in particular that maybe you look back on and say, I could have done it better if I had changed X, Y, and Z?
Yeah. Alexander, I made better over time. I went back 3 times. I put a DVD out in 2014, 10 years after. And it was called The Ultimate Alexander, and it's the best version by far because of the editing. It was an editing decision. And there's all these issues in editing that I know about that come out in structure, and I think it's the best structure by far. And some people just love that film. It has a whole cult following. Certainly, it's an interesting film. It's one of my films that I miss in terms of its, like Heaven and Earth. There's a lot of films I made that never got recognized. You could make a little library of U-Turn, Heaven and Earth, Alexander, Some People Savages, Snowden. I mean, it's not been easy. My films are don't easily go down, but I accept that, and I'm quite happy to write a book and write this memoir. Frankly, I'm not trying to fight that battle again of being looking for recognition for these films.
So I know it's still early, and your book is coming out next week on the 21st. How has the media reacted so far? Because I know you recently did an interview with the New York Times, and something you said there about Hollywood being too sensitive, that was really sensationalized. But overall, just how has the media treatment been the last couple of weeks as you've been promoting the book?
Well, frankly, from my point of view, excellent. It's been fun, and people who read the book seem to appreciate it. the earliest reviews are excellent. You know, it's not the right season to come out with a book. There's no bookstores open, but you know, you live with that too. It's just there's going to be less.
Did you think about maybe delaying it at all?
Of course we did, but the problem was that everything becomes backed up, and every publisher has that problem. So they have a back pile of books, and then whenever this thing changes or they have bookstores open, then there'll be too many books, you know. So it's another kind of problem. A book does have another lifetime aside from, you know, it's not like, well, a movie too, but a movie has to have some impact on that first week. And I think the book market is not quite like that. So there is a long-term thing in a book. A memoir lasts forever, hopefully, as does a movie. I play the long-term game.
So again, just looking back at these films, Scarface, could you speak a little bit about how making that movie was impacted by your own struggles? I mean, obviously, you know, the character himself is just dealing with just the moral decay around the subject of cocaine. How much did your own personal experience influence that movie?
I was certainly able to research it because I was hooked on cocaine at that time. My writing was suffering, but I didn't write Scarface on cocaine. Actually, after the research was completed in Florida, I went cold turkey, moved to Paris with my wife, where I knew nobody in the cocaine business, and I wrote it in a city where my mother's birth city. I wrote it cold turkey. So, but certainly I benefited from having seen the tension of Florida, Bimini. I went to Bimini. I hung out with some criminals there, some drug dealers who I saw the tensions of the trade and the beginnings of this eruption of the war on drugs. There was a lot of hypocrisy in it. And I tried to put a lot of that in the script, you know, where Tony.
And that was early on, too. That was the beginning of the war on drugs.
No, it wasn't. I was in jail in 1968 in San Diego. I talk about it in the book. It was Nixon was coming into office. He hadn't declared it yet, but it became the war on drugs. My prison in San Diego had 2,000 beds, I believe, and there was about 5,000 people in it. And some of these people were stuck in there for 6 months. They couldn't get your lawyer to show up. You know, it was crowded.
It's terrible.
The whole drug war was starting, and these people were young. Most of them were black. Most of them were Latino. And I was one of those whites that got stuck in there, too. They would have shipped me off to jail if I hadn't had a little money. My father had a little money to get me out. I finally got a lawyer to come to the jail. But the drug war was awful in the 70s, too.
That's true. I guess we just look back. We think of the drug war as really the Reagan and Bush years, but you're absolutely right. It was really being waged in the 70s as well.
Well, what came in the late 70s, well, for me, the cocaine was a different kind of drug. You see, the marijuana, the LSD, the hallucinogens all had positive effects. I don't think I would have been the same person if I hadn't discovered marijuana in Vietnam. And I think it was the black soldiers that really turned me on to it. The music, too. I learned a lot from them about relaxing, cooling it, enjoying your life, trying to stay human in this very difficult situation in war. But the cocaine started in the 70s for me, late 70s, but actually had been in Hollywood in the early 70s too, as we know now. I mean, it's come out, there's all these stories, but cocaine was a different kind of drug because it's a numb, it makes me numb. And I think I do think it affects your brain cells. I don't think anyone can keep it up over a period of time without getting stupider.
Do you think it's kind of a shame then that I think some folks look to Scarface and look to Tony as sort of a heroic figure and think that it's sort of in vogue with the cocaine culture, I guess?
Well, you could say that, but I think that they admired him, those who did, because he was a free man. He was his own man. He declared himself what he was. You all lie. I tell the truth.
Right.
Throughout the movie, he doesn't. He is very direct, as was the original Scarface in the 1932 version with Paul Muni.
Well, I have to ask you too, because I know last time you were on the show, we talked a little bit about the prevalence of comic book movies today. I wanted to ask you about your work on Conan. How do you think of that movie looking back on it?
As I said in the book, it's okay, the first movie, but it certainly was not even close to the dream that I had. I wrote a script that would have been I thought of a 12-part series. It could have been like a James Bond series. There were so many stories that Howard wrote, wonderful stories, wonderful characters, different settings. It had to be lush. It could have been like a Lord of the Rings, before Lord of the Rings. There wasn't much CGI at that point. I don't think there was much at all. But the original vision was big, and I wanted Ridley Scott to direct it. And I went to him, and we came close with him, but he was working on Blade Runner. And then we turned it over to John Milius, and also Dino De Laurentiis. And after that, the moment Dino got a hold of it, it changed. He was cutting costs. He wanted to make it as Dino's money was his god, and he cut every corner, and the picture looked like it. As I said, it didn't have a great DP. It didn't have a great art director. It didn't have a great music track. It didn't have all the elements I looked for. It was done on the cheap in Almeria. So I think the movie was okay. I think Arnold was great, and he's got charisma. But the second movie that Dino did right after it was a cheapie that flopped, and it was dead in two films. It killed it.
And that was really for kids. Like the one that you had done, that was really it seemed more geared towards adults.
Yeah, well, it wasn't what I wrote exactly. It felt more like a cult movie. Like the bad guy, Thulsa Doom, was this Charles Manson type with the cult figures around him. I mean, it seemed to John, I think, Milius, the drug culture of the '60s was anathema. It was evil. Not at all my kind of thinking.
So just getting back to the book, why did you decide to end the book in 1986 in particular? Why not continue it on into some of your later work and huge successes that you had in the 90s as well?
Because it's a huge story. And it's a huge story. I mean, a book would have been 700 pages, 800 pages. I couldn't do it. You want to make it reasonable. It's a story. The story is complete. You feel like you've reached the end of you've realized the dream that we set out to achieve. As I repeat, at 30 years old, he's broke and he's depressed. And at 40 years old, he's on top. That's a good little arc if you go back into the past and allow for it. You develop the character.
So what would be your advice to folks out there who want to succeed, and not just in Hollywood, but overall who, may have to struggle with the same sort of challenges that you did, like rejection, for example? What would be your piece of advice to them?
Well, you see it in the book. I mean, you got to take rejection. You got to understand it. You got to listen to it sometimes. Part of the problem is when you get your scripts rejected, you sometimes turn off. You said you don't learn from why they're rejecting it. So you have to absorb it. In other words, you can't reject. You can't say I'm just going to keep going and be an Iron Man. I guess I did that at times, but you're better off if you can listen, learn, adjust, go on. And that takes sometimes a great deal of resilience. It's like you have to bend like bamboo. You bend and you go with it. You don't. You can hate. You can say I'm going to get revenge. One day I'm going to fuck him over. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I went through hell on Platoon. It was rejected so many times. It almost got made twice.
Really.
Right at the lip with Dino De Laurentiis, that time with Michael Cimino in 1983. Almost. I was out in the Philippines, I cast the whole thing informally, no contract, but I cast it and I was ready to shoot. And man, when that fell apart, I said, no, forget it. I'm never going to make a Vietnam movie. And I really did walk away.
So, Oliver, as I mentioned, my co-host would like to ask you a couple questions, if that's all right.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you about Natural Born Killers. That's like one of my all-time favorite films. You had to work with someone else's script and you directed the film. Like, what is that like? Like taking
first of all, we bought a script by Quentin Tarantino that had been around, had been rejected and not made. And I just want to specify because it's important to understand that Tarantino made it really clear to the producers and to me that he was not making that movie. So it wasn't like we stole his script. It was paid very well.
That's I didn't think you stole it.
There were stories. I mean, this is the most like so many rumors exist around that. What we did was I liked the basis of the script. It was interesting, but we worked it heavily into what it became, which is, I believe, a bigger story about bigger issues, about the prison system, about the police system, and we really worked it as trying a sociological example of what violence can do in the media. Now that was in the Quentin script, and he had the character of the Australian journalist. I think it was
Wayne Gale.
but we really broadened it, and we put a lot of new lines in. It was Richard Ratowski, myself, and David. I forgot. I'm sorry, the last name. He helped us a lot. We did a great deal of work on it, like as it is with all scripts I've worked on. It becomes, it's a collaboration. It works through different layers. So let's get that aside, because you can read both versions, and people have, and you can see the difference.
So what was it about it that like made it stand out to you as something that you wanted to work with?
At that time, this is 1994. I viewed it as an answer to what the media was becoming, that it was becoming so sensationalized. If you remember, there was a series of murders, and they were prominent. They were taking over the news. The biggest one was the O.J. Simpson murder, which dominated the news as if there was nothing else going on in the world. Sensationalism became the menu of the day, which is dangerous for society because it distorts the values of it.
It still exists today.
Oh, it becomes
yeah.
You understand, in 1990, I felt like this is new. They're spending more and more money and time on this, and the OJ trial must have made a lot of money for television. You have to realize that it was always on the air, no matter what channel you went to. They'd update. So there was a tremendous amount of advertising money that was made. News became for profit, and that is horrible for society. Mm-hmm. Capitalism, when taken in excess, can ruin anything.
Yeah, media today still is bought and sold. What is the significance of the yin yang symbol that we see Mickey wear on his left ear, like in the film? It's like a prominent symbol, and I'm still not really sure I quite grasp the whole concept of it as it applies in the film. I know that's kind of specific, but
the snakes that were winding through.
No, not the snakes. The yin yang symbol. Mickey has it on his left ear. He wears it on his left earlobe, and he also has a tattoo of it, like later in the film.
Well, he certainly was a feminist at his time, wasn't he?
I guess so. Yeah. And he also wears white in the anime sequence. I don't think I really got that. He wears like all white
in the animated.
Where he's like muscly and he's like.
Yeah.
Like sprinting down a hallway.
Yeah, sure. Why white? Well, because maybe the artist was very moved by the fact that he first appears in an apron. He's a butcher boy, the delivery boy from the meat store. But it was a Korean artist. I believe it was a Korean firm that did that, and we were playing with it. Certainly, it was novel at the time. Certainly it was done with Roger Rabbit, but we wanted also to push that into this sphere of this madness, this chaos we're creating.
And what is it like to work with like Woody Harrelson and say Robert Downey Jr. and like watch their careers like blow up over time? You're like, oh, I remember. Like, is that strange to you? Is that
no, not at all. They're both very talented. Both Woody was coming off of a film with Demi Moore and Robert Redford, but they hadn't really used his malicious side. His Woody has that evil smile or whatever. I love that smile. It's mischievous, and he's charming. And I just saw the moment he came in and I met him, I just felt he was right for this. He comes from that milieu. He comes from that sort of American heartland, and the way he thinks and talks. And he was cool as a cucumber, and nobody had seen him like that. He'd been on Cheers, I think, as a good guy. Remember the TV show?
Yeah.
So he was known as a bartender or something. I never watched it, but I enjoyed working with him so much. And he was laid back, and he is what he is. And Robert was a dynamic talent. I mean, he'd been in the Attenborough movie as Charlie Chaplin, did a great job. Charlie Chaplin movie, been nominated for Oscars. So he was a known entity. And but I was very delighted that he took a smaller role. It wasn't the main role, but he is the third character in the movie, because they kill him at the end, And I think it had more impact it being Robert Downey. He was great. And by the way, he's the one who tried to play Steve Dunleavy, who was an Australian newscaster, a sensationalist of something, working in America at that time. So I think he did a pretty good job of imitating a madman in the media.
What about Juliette Lewis? How did you cast her?
Juliette, we cast off Marty's film, wasn't it? The Cape Fear, and she was a young girl. She was.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And,
okay.
What they call an Agenoué. She was Agenoué, and I don't know what the American word for that is, but she was rebellious and wild and not terribly disciplined at that point in her life as an actress. But and I had to get her in shape, man. Boy, that was hard. Getting her to physically work out every day with a trainer was a number. She was a wild animal. I like that.
It definitely paid off, the scene in the diner, like right in the beginning. It just like blows me away where she's got like the finger guns. I love that. And what about Tom Sizemore?
Tom Sizemore. He was in Born on the 4th of July. I think I met him there, and he was a character, Tom. He loved it. I mean, he's a very good actor. I mean, yes, he has his excesses, as you know, but he's so evil in a way, but he plays the cop. I put him in.
He seems like perfect for that. Like he was like born for it.
What he did with it was unbelievable. I mean, embarrassing in some ways, but he got down, man, and he enjoyed himself. It was a wild shoot because all of them were a little nutty, and interacting with each other. And Tommy Lee Jones too. It was, wow. Tommy, I'd worked with on Heaven and Earth and JFK, so. We had fun with it. He came in. He said, "Let me wear a jacket that's too small for me, so I look like a muscle man." And if you notice, he looks like something out of a Wile E. Coyote or one of those Tex Jones commercial cartoons, right? We played him like a mustache twirling villain. We were into satire. I mean, it didn't matter. We were just going for it. The biggest Rodney Dangerfield. God, I loved him.
Yeah.
I mean, we had fun, and we weren't worried about reality. I'd been working in reality at that point quite a few times. Making Born on the 4th of July, JFK, movies about real people. I wanted to get away from it all, and I just let it go. It was like a cartoon for me. What surprised me when the movie came out was the negative reaction to, as if it was realistic. To me, it was not even close to reality. It was a cartoon from the beginning. I saw it that way, but not other people. People had no sense of humor about that. They took it literally. They thought that this was real violence.
Well, I don't know. It almost kind of is, because I mean, if you look at Mickey compared to Jack Scagnetti, they're both kind of psychopaths, but they're on different sides of the law. And that's kind of what I think I like the most about the movie, is the statement that it makes about people who have authority and don't are just as capable of good and evil. But I think we're out of time. I'm going to have to hand the mic back to Steve.
I'll just say one more thing, okay? I think what bothered people was something about what you just said. You said one guy's on the side of the law. Well, that was just the point of the movie. The law is fucked up. The system is fucked up. It was, think about it, the media, the cops, the prison system. That's the system. They are all fucked up in the movie.
Yeah,
and here are these two psycho killers, these two who kill 50-some people, but they're not as bad as
exactly
that they run into. So that upsets people. You know, like I'm saying, you know, they're not so bad. Look what they're up against. And I question the whole concept of a society that's gone berserk, frankly, than I did at the time. And
yeah,
I don't think I'm so wrong. I think there's a lot of berserkness. And
I think that movie's a bullseye to me. So
yeah, thank you.
Thanks for it.
Well, again, I really do appreciate you being on the show today to discuss your book and discuss all of these different films. They've made a major impact on me and millions of other people. I guess that would be my last question, actually. What is it like to know that you've affected the American culture in such a deep way, and not just art, but also historically? I mean, when I think about the JFK assassination, I think about your film. What is it like knowing that you've had that big of an impact on the American psyche?
I don't know if I have, but thank you. I mean, I think people like you, certainly, you know, you're sensitive and I think intelligent, but I think, you know, it's a culture, it's a pop culture, things come and go. You don't think that there's much of a memory, you know, but that's why I write a memoir, because I want to remember, and I appreciate memory, and I'm glad I have one. So, you know, I'm still working at expressing myself. I don't necessarily feel like I have to make another movie. I've made documentaries now, but I feel like this new one I'm doing on energy is very important. So I'm staying relevant to my time. Energy is important. Clean energy is crucial. And there's ways to do it without getting screwed up as we have been. Also, the JFK documentary I'm doing in 4 hours, I told you, I think we discussed this.
Yes.
It's a very strong follow-up to the film with factual detail from the Assassination Records Review Board. So no, don't ask me that kind of question, because it'd be nice to have impact. In this culture, you never know. At least the thing is, I've had international impact too. I know that I'm accepted in many countries abroad, and that's good. So hopefully some of the American people will catch up to what I did. You know, a lot of them are young and haven't seen anything, but certainly I'm hoping they will.
Well, again, I think that you've had a tremendous influence on American culture, and I sincerely look forward to getting through the rest of your book here. For folks out there who want to pick it up, how can they do that?
Amazon book site, Barnes & Noble book site, or a bookstore if it's open. In New York, they're open. The Strand bookstore at 19th Street. I think it's 19th Street. Is running a symposium next week, next Monday or Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday we come out. They're running it Monday night, I believe. Symposium has a big. Me and Ethan Hawke are talking about the book. He's written 3 novels. That's on Monday. It's on Monday night.
Well, Oliver, again, I really do appreciate you being back on the show, and hopefully we can have you back at some point in the future.
Did you see the book cover? Have you seen this?
Yes. It's Chasing the Light by Oliver Stone, and that is now available. And Oliver, thank you very much for coming on the show to discuss the book.
Okay, take care of yourself.
Thank you.